Chapter 47. The 7 Immortal Swords. Wasn't this a character from the God-Sealing List novel in the past? Oh, you have doubts, Cripple imitated, that he could see Guhai's surprise. Yes, I have curiosity. The one Shu Taoist cult. I've heard of it, along with the Sun God Palace and the Spirit Mountain Sacred Ground. It's one of the 3 holy places in the world, or the 3 upper sects. The 10,000 longevity Taoist cult. The Tongshan lineage. Is there also the Tai Shong lineage, the Yuan Shai lineage? Guhai revealed a wave of doubt and said, "Huh." Qing Feng's eyes glazed over, revealing a hint of surprise. "Where did you hear that?" Cripple also said in doubt, "There really is." Then the sect master of the 10,000 longevity Taoist sect is, Guhai said in surprise. In this generation, its sect leader Tongxie. Cripple looked at Guhai suspiciously and didn't hide it. Sect leader Tongxie, the 4 immortal execution swords. Guhai was surprised too. This is too evil, isn't it? Qing Feng's pupil shrank, looking at Guhai in surprise, then turning to look at Cripple. The surprise in his eyes was self-evident. That's not right, as far as I remember. It seems to be execution, killing, trapping, and extinction. Execution immortal sword, killing immortal sword, trapping immortal sword, and extinction immortal sword. Ah, Guhai frowned. Cripple looked at Guhai with a solemn expression. Hey, it seems like you've transmigrated just like me. Perhaps in your generation, you've only seen for a handles. The execution trap and destroy Airslayer. Exorcism trap Deathslayer Airslayer. 3 more, the Immortalicide sword. Immortal Slayer sword. Empty immortal sword, sect leader Tongshan. He refined not 4, but 7. Guhai's brows furrowed into a Chuan character and said, "Young lord." Qing Feng on the side opened his mouth at once, as if he wanted to stop Cripple from explaining to Guhai. There's no harm. It's nothing since he knows about this secret. Cripple shook his head. Tongshan sect master. The Tongshan sect leader of the Manjushri Dao Palace is number 1 in the world in Sword Dao. Guhai frowned. Number 1 in the world in Sword Dao. Cripple's pupils suddenly shrunk, revealing a faint smile. It is now. And stronger. But what will happen in the future? Who knows? Hehe, Cripple faintly said. Although it was said with certainty, but there was a general air of disbelief in his tone. Generation to generation. Wait, did you just say the Tongshan vein? A lineage throughout the ages. The Tongshan sect master was not a single person. Guhai said doubtfully. Cripple explained. So, it's not that Tongshan from the Interceptor sect. Guhai revealed a hint of puzzlement. Interceptor sect? What's that? Cripple queried. Guhai, just the same name, but this is too much of a coincidence, right? The immortal execution sword is all the same. The 7th of the 16 great magic treasures of the ancient times. The 7 immortal execution swords. Perhaps I heard someone else introduce it wrong. I've heard of the Interceptor sect, the Elucidator sect, and the Human sect. But unfortunately, they were all wrong. Guhai laughed bitterly. Cripple nodded. With his own knowledge of the Manifest Destiny Dao Palace, he hadn't even heard of any Interceptor sect, so it was obvious that Guhai had heard it wrong. Thanks for telling me. Guhai, however, politely said. It's nothing. Those who are in the Heavenly Palace, nearly all of them know things. It's nothing for you to know in advance. Cripple shook his head. I wonder if the 2 of you are blocking my path, but... Guhai said in a deep voice. I heard someone mention that you use a large formation to condense the sword cultivator Dokoroku, not long ago. I even saw your sword technique Wuxia today. I came to feel. I hope you do not begrudge me giving me a sword, for me to feel. Cripple solemnly said. Wuxia. Guhai raised an eyebrow. Yes, Joe Heaven. I know that you were limited by your cultivation that day, and it seems that you were unable to execute your last blade," Cripple said in a deep voice. Oh, Gu Hai's eyes narrowed. At that time, the Zhou Xia triple chop to blade explosion was because he had exhausted his power and thought that he had concealed it from everyone, but Cripple saw it in front of him. "I want to see that last slash of yours," Cripple solemnly said. "Zhou Xia-san," Gu Hai frowned. "Yes, Zhou Xia-san," Cripple nodded. "Hey, since you know that I can't perform it, wouldn't you be imposing?" Gu Hai said in a deep voice. Gu Hai looked over. He saw Cripple's eyes steeply erupt with a dazzling sharp light. It blasted towards Gu Hai's mind in general. Boom. Steeply, Gu Hai's mind shifted and appeared in a white space. In the white space, there were only two people, himself and that cripple. The cripple was standing not far away, carrying a bronze longsword on his back, quietly looking towards himself. "Hey," Gu Hai's face sank. "Don't worry. This is a spiritual space created by me. You and I both enter with our consciousness. It's not hard to return, but here, you can execute your full strength strike. Don't worry about not having enough power. Because this is just a spiritual world. Anything is possible," Cripple Jung said. "To strike out with a sword." Gu Hai raised his eyebrows, and his face was gloomy for a while. The cripple in front of him had appeared out of nowhere. Or perhaps it had been staring at him for a long time. Showing his sword, Gu Hai wasn't the type of person who loved to show off, so naturally, he didn't want to. "I'm very happy to meet you this time. Please don't hesitate to give me some advice," Cripple said sincerely. Gu Hai stared at Cripple for a while. There was silence for a while. Instead, Cripple clasped his fists and waited. After a while, Gu Hai solemnly said, "Good." Cripple smiled faintly. "Many thanks." Gu Hai probed his hand, and a long knife steeply appeared in his hand. This knife, Gu Hai looked at the long knife that his consciousness had condensed. "It won't explode, don't worry. Consciousness condensation. Do whatever you want," Cripple Jung said. Gu Hai nodded. Grasping the long knife, Gu Hai steeply condensed his eyes and stepped forward with his right foot. The foot stepped on the heavenly yuan, buzz. The blade intent condensed, and 221 black and white blades steeply appeared in the surroundings, forming an extremely complex chess game around Gu Hai. "Zhou Xia-san," Gu Hai's face sank. The long blade steeply chopped out a blade astral darting straight towards Cripple. 221 black and white blades steeply converged towards the long blade. The surrounding void was trembling in general. A towering blade momentum steeply formed. The saber astral for the sea, saber gas for the river. 10,000 rivers converge into the sea. A pouring oceanic giant force towards the cripple rushed straight away. Roar. Tilde 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 tilde. An unrelenting blade rushed straight towards Cripple. Cripple stepped in place, eyes glaring up, and did not draw his sword. Steeply, a cold light flashed through Cripple's eyes. Buzz. The sword intent condensed in both eyes steeply condensed a bronze longsword sword, Diang in the void. The sword intent condensed the Diang and charged straight at Zhou Qiasan's sword Diang. Boom. The blade Dang and sword Dang collided with a bang, and the spirit world shook violently under the tremendous impact. Buzz. Around the sword dipper, a large amount of sword Jia erupted, taking on the shape of a cyan-colored lotus flower, and a single lotus petal scattered, seemingly dispersing Zhou Qiasan's might slowly. Rumble. Between the shaking of the spirit world, the sword dangles and sword dangles disappeared. Undistinguished, Gu Hai, however, narrowed his eyes slightly, not indistinguishable, because the crippled person in front of him hadn't even drawn his sword, and his own Zhou Qiasan was actually dissolved by it. A look, a sword intent, he blocked himself. This person's sword Dao was so strong. Gu Hai's face sank, cripple, but raised an eyebrow. What a strong sword intent, my sword lotus was disintegrated by you. The blade is sharp and the yin and yang are in harmony, but it's the perfect sword technique. It even makes me feel a hint of a crippling flaw in my sword Dao, yin-yang reconciliation. Perhaps it can make up for my crippling flaws. Many thanks, Gu Hai. Many thanks, my blade technique fed your sword. Hey, since you want to see it, then let's see it. I still have one more blade. Gu Hai's eyes glazed over. Oh, another Zhou Qiasan. I knew that your Zhou Qiasan couldn't possibly have only one slash. Come on. Cripple lightly laughed. Gu Hai's eyes went cold. Be careful, Gu Hai said in a deep voice. As he spoke, he once again stepped on the heavenly yuan. Buzz, steeply, 281 handles of saber chair coalesced around once again. Only, this time, the saber chair was too ferocious, and it seemed that each of them coalesced into a solid body. 281 handles. As soon as the new game came out, steeply, a terrifyingly huge might shook in the entire spiritual world, and the spiritual world shook violently. Cripple's pupils abruptly shrunk. This time, Gu Hai was holding the hilt of his sword with both hands, and with a grimace on his face, he slashed down. Where the blades passed, large swaths of the spiritual world collapsed. Zhou Q ~4. Gu Hai let out a loud shout. Boom! The spirit world went straight towards Cripple's face along with the blade amidst the tearing. Cripple's eyes erupted into a sword dipper. Boom! The sword dipper was shattered by the blade dipper as it continued to charge towards Cripple. Good sword. Cripple steeped his face in great joy. Finally, Cripple drew his sword, bared Jin. The long sword was drawn, and the void was suddenly filled with green light. With excitement and a grimace on his face, Cripple slashed his sword, and the vast green sword lotus silhouette coalesced in the void, crashing into the blade. Boom! The sword dipper and sword dipper collided. Under the tremendous impact, the entire spirit world exploded open. Buzz! The two returned their consciousness to their bodies. In Qing Feng's eyes, Cripple and Gu Hai, the duo did not move until the beginning. Boom! In the central void between Gu Hai and Cripple, there was a violent explosion. The two returned their consciousness to their bodies, and a large amount of smoke and dust bloomed on the ground. Cripple, you're the strongest person I've ever seen in terms of sword Dao. Gu Hai took a deep breath of shock. Cripple also had a shock in his eyes. Thank you for your advice. This time, you and I are even. How about it? A tie, Qing Feng said in disbelief. Cripple had never been in a tie with anyone, ever. From the beginning of sword practice, there was never a win, not a loss, and never a draw. A draw, impossible. With this Gu Hai, good, Gu Hai nodded.